mathematicians. So in this first handout for Chapter 7, we are just going to review some important angle measures. So these are those points that we use on the unit circle. It may have been a while since we've used these. We don't use them a ton in Chapter 6. So since Chapter 5 was a little while ago, we're just going to take a few minutes and review these. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to put on here is the easy points, and by the easy points I mean we have a radian measure at 0 or 0 degrees, and then this point on the unit circle is 1, 0. And then up here on the y-axis we have pi over 2, which in degrees is 90 degrees, and this point is at 0, 1. And then we have pi, which is 180 degrees, and this is the point -1, 0. And then the fourth point down here is 3 pi over 2, or 270 degrees, and that terminal point is at 0, -1. All right, so in each quadrant we have 3 main points of interest, or those nice points that we derived at the beginning of Chapter 5. So the first point we have is actually pi over 6, and if you recall, that is the same as 30 degrees. And in the first quadrant, we know all points are positive, and this is the point √3 over 2, 1/2. All right, the next point that we talked about was pi force, which is 45 degrees, and that corresponds to the point √2 over 2, √2 over 2. And then the next point of interest was pi thirds, which is 60 degrees, and it goes with the terminal point 1/2, √3 over 2. All right, now all 3 of these points just repeat as you go through the unit circle. The only thing that is going to change is, of course, the degree measures are going to get larger, and then the signs on our terminal points will change. So let's look at first our next multiple of pi over 6, which would be over at 5 pi over 6. And that is the same as 150 degrees. And then it's going to still be a √3 over 2, but now the x value is negative. And the y value is still going to be +1/2. All right, and then we have pi over our 3 pi over 4, which is 135 degrees. And the x value, of course, is also going to be negative, so this is -√2 over 2, √2 over 2. All right, and then we also have 2 pi over 3 in this quadrant, which is 120 degrees, and that is -1/2, +√3 over 2. All right, so if we keep working our way around the unit circle, the next point we're going to run into is 7 pi over 6. So 7 pi over 6, which is another 60 degrees from the previous point. So this is 210 degrees. And that everything in this quadrant is going to be negative. So it's -√3 over 2, -1/2. All right, and then we get to 5 pi force. And 5 pi force is 225 degrees. And again, both x and y are negative, so we have -√2 over 2, -√2 over 2. For some reason this doesn't want to write. There we go. All right. And the next point we have in quadrant 3 is 4 pi thirds. And 4 pi thirds is 240 degrees. And it is negative 1/2, comma, negative root 3 over 2. All right, and then we make our way to the fourth quadrant. So in quadrant 4, next we're going to go to 300 degrees, which corresponds to 5 pi thirds. So this is 300 degrees, which now the x value is positive, so we have positive 1/2 and a negative root 3 over 2. All right, then we get to 7 pi fourths. And 7 pi fourths is 315 degrees. And then we have positive root 2 over 2, comma, negative root 2 over 2. And the final point is 11 pi over 6, which is 330 degrees. And the terminal point is root 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. All right, so as we mentioned previously when we did the unit circle, there's a lot of patterns going on here. So this next text box just kind of reminds us that if you have any angle that is a multiple of pi 6, so pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6. So if your radian measure is some form pi over 6, the terminal point, if you notice for all of these, the x value is root 3 over 2, the y value is 1/2. And the signs could change, it just depends on what quadrant you end up being in. So that's for any multiple of pi over 6. For the pi over fourths, the terminal point is root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. And again, that's any radian measure with a denominator of 4. And again, those signs could change depending on which quadrant you're in. And then the last one is pi over third is always going to have the form 1/2, comma, root 3 over 2. So if you can just remember those radian measures in the first quadrant, you can kind of use that to really find any of the radian measures. As long as you know which quadrant you're in, you should be able to find the terminal point. All right, so this sheet is going to be handy because we are going to use these radian and angle measures quite a bit in chapter 7. So if you have this handy when you're working on homework, it'll make your life a little bit easier. All right, see you guys.